Good. Oh, it's very loud. I guess we can start since we're already a couple minutes in. Thank you for coming and attending our session. Hope we are not you're not too tired after having had lunch, or that you are starving, waiting to go for lunch. But today, what we are going to talk to you about is about how you can uncover instances of internet censorship through free and open source software. We will also talk to you a bit about some of the recent cases of internet censorship that we have found around the world in some specific case studies that we have been working on in the past 1 or 2 years. So first, to tell you a bit about our project, what we work on, we are UNI, or the Open Observatory of Network Interference. And what this is a free software project under the Tor project that aims to build a decentralized platform for monitoring internet censorship around the world. This project started back in 2012, and since then we have been collecting millions of measurements from all over the world. We cover now more than even 190 countries, actually. And thanks to these free and open source tests, we have gathered data that proves, that shows evidence of various cases of network interference or internet censorship around the world. The foundation of our methodology is that we want to ensure that the tests that are implemented as part of our software testing suite are openly specified, as in they are well documented and people can independently write their own implementation of such tests. The reference implementation, I guess, is also free and open source, so you can verify if what we claim to be measuring is in fact being measured. And all the data that we collect is made available openly. The sorts of tests that we conduct as part of UNI are mainly, fit mainly within, I guess, these 5 categories. So we have tests that aim to detect the blocking of particular websites. So here we're trying to answer the question of this set of sites that are interesting, relevant to be monitored, which ones are in fact being blocked and how are they being blocked. We have tests for detecting the blocking of various instant messaging apps, including WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, and Telegram. We have tests that aim to check if whether or not particular censorship circumvention tools are working or are not working, such as Tor, Siphon, VPN, Lantern, all the various pluggable transports, etc. And then we have a series of tests that aim to detect what we call middle boxes, and we'll go a bit later into what we mean exactly by this, but in general these are devices that can be present on a network, and what they do is they basically intercept your network traffic and sometimes perform alterations to such network traffic. And they can be responsible sometimes also for internet censorship or even surveillance. Other types of tests that we have are more aimed at sort of measuring the speed and performance of your network. So for example, we have as part of the mobile app an implementation of the NDT test, or network diagnostic test, which basically tells you how fast your network is. And so now Maria will tell you a bit about some of the recent cases of internet censorship that we have investigated with UNI.
Thanks. So over the last year, we have tried to bring UNI to a more diverse audience, in the sense that up until quite recently, most of UNI's, can you hear me well? Most of UNI's audience was mostly technologists, but in the end of the day, we feel that the project is designed for lawyers, human rights defenders, journalists, basically people who are interested in using the type of data that UNI can collect to examine internet censorship. And because, as mentioned by Arturo, the software basically is designed to perform tests on networks and to collect network measurement data, this data can potentially serve as evidence of internet censorship. So specifically, so over the last year, we've been working with a number of digital rights organizations across South America, Africa, Asia, Southeast Asia more specifically, and we've seen a lot of very interesting cases. First of all, in Brazil, some of you may have already heard of these cases, but a judge essentially ordered the blocking of WhatsApp. Are we familiar with this case? No? Okay. Well, how it happened basically was that, well, I would imagine that most of us are probably familiar with the fact that WhatsApp now uses the Signal protocol for end-to-end encryption, right? Great. Okay, so while this is a fantastic thing because, you know, it enables millions of users to have more privacy in their communications, it also created certain problems for certain governments around the world. More specifically, when Brazilian authorities were investigating various criminal cases, they asked WhatsApp to disclose data pertaining to the individuals who they thought were suspects involved in drug trafficking cases. WhatsApp denied to disclose this type of information. And as a result, as a form of retribution, Brazilian authorities ordered the blocking of WhatsApp twice. The first time was in December 2015. That lasted for about 48 hours. And the second time was in May 2016, which actually lasted quite longer. That was for about 72 hours. The interesting thing here is that obviously since the Signal protocol has been implemented, even if WhatsApp did want to disclose this type of data, so basically the personal communications of the suspects, they obviously are not in a position to do so because there's end-to-end encryption being implemented. And this is, we think, a very interesting case where authorities try to take action against companies, and specifically in this case, they ordered the blocking of the app completely. But in many cases, what we also see is that a lot of governments have or seek plausible deniability when they implement various types of information controls. The thing with censorship is that a lot of the reporting is based on rumors. So, for example, people saying, "I can't access this website. Oh, this is very slow," or there's various types of rumors that people on the ground report. Sometimes these cases may be censorship, sometimes not. When we talk about censorship, what we mean is the intentional blocking of information. So the question is, how can you collect data that can actually prove that it was intentional blocking? So this is an example of what we did in Brazil, where we developed a test specifically designed to test the reachability of WhatsApp. And our partners on the ground ran the test and collected data, which not only showed that WhatsApp was indeed blocked, but it also showed how WhatsApp was blocked, in this case specifically through DNS hijacking. We subsequently released a blog, which also includes all of the data, which shows exactly how the app was blocked. Very often we see that censorship is politically motivated, or we think that is the case, or but it's even more interesting when we're able to collect data which can prove that censorship is in fact politically motivated. We have examined numerous cases like these ones over the last year. One example was in Uganda. So in Uganda they had general elections in February 2016, and during the general elections, there were rumors on the ground or reports that various social media sites were inaccessible. Then a few months later, in May of the same year, during the inauguration of President Museveni, similarly, there were again reports from locals on the ground in Uganda that they couldn't access various social networking sites. In order to investigate the situation, we got in touch with our partners in Uganda. They ran our software, and based on the tests that were performed, we were able to collect data which not only confirmed that social media sites were being blocked, but they also showed how they were blocked during the general elections and during the inauguration of President Museveni. Through this table over here, the interesting thing that you can see is that censorship has been implemented differently across providers. Here we have a comparison of the blocking implemented during these political events by Smile and also by Orange. And what you can see is that they didn't block the same sites So for example, you can see that Orange blocked only Facebook and Twitter, but Orange didn't block WhatsApp and Viber and other apps. Also, the interesting thing here is that they only blocked the HTTP version of these sites and not the HTTPS version, meaning that possibly, you know, they were maybe not very favorable of this. They weren't very happy that they received this order to block social media, and therefore probably tried to implement, you know, quick and dirty censorship, which enables their users to very easily circumvent the specific blocking by simply trying to access these websites over HTTPS rather than HTTP. In contrast, we see that Smile Telecom decided to not only block both the HTTP and the HTTPS versions of these sites, but they also blocked the websites of WhatsApp and Viber amongst them. Through this example, what we can see essentially is that what is very likely the case is that the Ugandan authorities didn't order ISPs to block specific types of websites or specific types of apps. Rather, they probably gave a blank order to block social media, and then it was up to, you know, ISPs to decide how they would be blocking social media and which social media platform specifically they would be blocking. This obviously can be both a good and a bad thing. Good in the sense that we see that some ISPs decided to not block a variety of sites, but then it's also negative because there isn't much transparency in terms of how censorship has been implemented. That's why we feel that our software is important, because it can provide you this sort of transparency. Are we familiar with the events, the very disturbing events in Ethiopia over the last year? Maybe? No? So in summary, and I will try to do justice to the events, but I'm probably not the best person in the world to describe them. In short, major protests have been taking place in Ethiopia over the last year, well, more than a year, since November 2015. These protests have been by big ethnic groups in Ethiopia against the elites, which is in power. Interestingly enough, the elites is basically the Tigray ethnic group, which like in terms of population is a minority, but still they have been in power for many decades. And other ethnic groups which, you know, make up a bigger proportion of the population, they have historically over the last decades been marginalized socially, marginalized economically, and they've been persecuted, and there have been many reports of abuse by authorities. So what happened essentially was that in 2015, the government announced this plan to expand the capital into neighboring Omoro towns. Omoro is one of these big ethnic groups. And in doing so, this basically triggered protests against this plan, because that would only subsequently lead to more persecution and marginalization. This kind of inspired later on another ethnic group to join the protests. And before we realized that we had these massive protests in Ethiopia from these two large ethnic groups against the government. These protests have been very deadly. According to Amnesty International, more than 500 people have been murdered by security forces over the last year. And in the middle of these protests, what was interesting was that locals were also reporting various censorship events. What you can see here through this graph is an internet shutdown that was reported between the 6th and the 8th of August, which is a weekend when the protests really escalated. So our software, is not really in a position right now to measure internet shutdowns as a whole. When we say internet shutdowns, what we mean is a total blackout when there is no internet. And obviously, our software requires, you know, connection to a network in order to perform the testing. So if there is no network, if there is no internet, it just can't perform tests. But since there were all these reports about, you know, the internet being shut down in the region, we tried to resort to third-party data sources which could help us gain some insight in terms of what was happening. So what you can see here is data which has been which has been released by Google. This is Google traffic data. Google has what's called Google Transparency Reports. They essentially release data which shows large volumes of internet traffic per country for various services like Google Search, Gmail, YouTube, and so on. And so what you can see here is that while in general throughout the years there was some normal flow of internet traffic, suddenly between the 6th and the 8th of August there is no traffic. There is a very clear and visible, you know, disruption of internet traffic. So this is indicative that an internet shutdown most likely occurred during the political protests in Ethiopia, thus stifling communications and political organization. Quite similarly, We saw another shutdown in the Gambia. And interesting enough, this took place during their last general elections on the 1st of December. So President Jammeh was in power. He was ruling the Gambia for about 22 years, if I'm not mistaken. And during the weekend of his elections, suddenly the internet was reported to be disrupted completely. So again, we refer to Google traffic data, and as you can see, there appears to have been no internet during those days. We also refer to other types of data sources. So we looked, for example, at BGP announcement data, which is usually aggregated by RIPE. This type of data allows you to gain some insight into the routing within networks. And then based on that, for example, when you see the mass removal of prefixes, that can be a starting point to examine whether an internet shutdown is occurring or not. Generally speaking, we try to refer to various types of data sets which meet two criteria, the two main criteria. The first one being that they collect and publish large volumes of internet traffic originating from a lot of countries around the world, and obviously including the country that you're interested in. And second of all, that they can provide some insight into the routing within networks. Such data sets are not only Google traffic data, but they can also include NDT measurement data because they have probes deployed all over the world. And we recently published a post where we explain our methodology and where we list these types of data sources that you can refer to if you're interested in examining an internet shutdown. And this post also includes a script that Arturo wrote, which allows you to examine shutdowns through these data sources in a more automated fashion. Which country is that? Ethiopia. So going back to Ethiopia, as mentioned, there have been major protests over the last year. Now, Ethiopia is currently in a state of emergency. As of October the 8th, the state of emergency was declared, and following the state of emergency, a lot of the freedoms that were previously, allowed in the country have now been rescinded. The state of emergency was initially declared for 6 months, but now recently they announced that it would be extended for another 4 months. So that is kind of the cherry on the cake because the situation is just only extending. So in the middle of all of this chaos in Ethiopia, a very brave volunteer, a very brave researcher on information controls ran our software in Ethiopia to collect data that could show whether and to what extent various internet censorship events were occurring in the middle of the protests. The interesting thing from the findings was basically that, first of all, the data showed that WhatsApp was blocked during the protests, thus, preventing protesters from communicating with each other and, further politically organizing. Another interesting thing was that the data showed that was collected that deep packet inspection technology was found, specifically used to block a very major media website in Ethiopia called ekadforum.com. And along with that, we also found the blocking of 15 other major Ethiopian news websites. But it wasn't only communication tools and media websites that we found to be blocked. We also found various LGBTI websites to be blocked. We also found websites of armed groups and of the political opposition to also be blocked. We also found websites of various NGOs who advocate for freedom of expression to also be blocked. And we also found the blocking of various censorship circumvention tool sites such as Tor and Siphon. For us, this is extremely concerning because what it means in practice is that in the middle of these deadly political protests, individuals on the ground are prevented from having access to basic communication tools. They are prevented from having access to media reports, and in some cases, they are even prevented from, downloading circumvention tools, which would potentially allow them to circumvent all of this censorship. So we have published a report in collaboration with Amnesty International. At the bottom of the slide, you can find the link to our report where you can find more details about our research in the area. So in collaboration with our partners in Southeast Asia, we have also been examining the state of internet censorship in various countries in the region. In Malaysia specifically, is anyone familiar with the 1MDB scandal in Malaysia? No. Yes? Ah, great. So for those who aren't very familiar with it, so very briefly, the 1MDB scandal kind of erupted in 2015. 1MDB is a government-run strategic development company in Malaysia, which aims to, advance economic development. But as mentioned, this is basically controlled by the government. The scandal came out when the Washington Post reported that the Prime Minister of Malaysia had essentially transferred around $700 million to his personal bank accounts. So this was and is a very major political scandal in Malaysia. Following the scandal, there were various reports on the ground that media websites that were reporting on the scandal were being blocked in the country. In our effort to collect data that can serve as evidence of politically motivated censorship, we had UNI tests run on the ground, and the data that we collected not only confirms that these sites were blocked, but also showed the blocking of numerous other sites. So specifically, we found a lot of different types of local news websites which were covering the scandal to be blocked. We found medium.com to be blocked as well, because certain bloggers wrote about the scandal there too. And we also found various other personal blogs to be blocked as well, which were reporting specifically on the scandal. So this type of data, we feel, serves as evidence is one of the many cases that can serve as evidence of politically motivated censorship. Along with that, we also found other sites to be blocked in Malaysia, like pornography and gambling sites, and so on. Another case is Thailand. So in Thailand, again, we were able to confirm multiple cases of internet censorship. The interesting thing, though, in Thailand was that we saw that a lot of different censorship been implemented across different networks. So specifically, in certain mobile networks, we were able to see that major news websites like the New York Post and the Daily Mail were blocked. But we did not find them to be blocked in other networks across the country. Similarly, we found WikiLeaks to be blocked in certain mobile networks, but not to be blocked elsewhere. So this kind of indicates that the orders that ISPs probably get in Thailand in terms of censorship, they're ordered to block content based on the lèse majesté rules. They're ordered to block content that is deemed to be offensive towards the king and towards the military junta. But it's likely that service providers don't have explicit rules in terms of which sites to block and why and so on. So it's up to them to decide how they'll be implementing the censorship and so on. So that is why I think that we saw that some sites were blocked in some networks and not blocked in others, which is quite concerning, I think, and also inevitably raises the question of accountability and transparency. So in the case of Thailand, we're able to confirm the blocking of 13 websites. And the reason why we're saying we're able to confirm them was because we detected in those networks the presence of so-called middle boxes, so proxy technologies that can be used for implementing censorship. And we're able to see that, that through the use of these middle boxes, they were serving block pages for these various different types of sites. And also amongst these different sites, again, quite similarly to previous cases, we also found the sites of censorship circumvention tools like Hotspot Shield to also be blocked in the country. Finally, so this is a more positive case in a way. So in Myanmar, we were not able to confirm any cases of censorship. The reason why I'm using the word confirm is because we tend to only confirm cases of censorship when we detect a block page. When we don't detect a block page, then based on analysis, we're able to say that censorship is more likely to be occurring or less likely. But anyhow, in the case of Myanmar, we performed extensive testing across multiple local vantage points in Myanmar for 4 or 5 months. And as part of the testing, we tested thousands of different websites. The good news is that we found almost all of these websites to be accessible in all of the networks. Except for 5 sites which presented signs of TCP and HTTP blocking. The interesting thing is that these sites include the website of the US Embassy in Myanmar, and they also include the website of the Organization of the American States. However, we can't really say that we're absolutely sure that these sites are in fact blocked or that they are blocked on a nationwide level because we did not see any block pages. I think the most interesting thing from our study in Myanmar was that 2 years ago, sorry, not 2 years ago, back in 2012, so 5 years ago, Uni tests were again run in Myanmar, and through these tests, we detected the presence of blue coat software. Are we familiar with blue coat or heard of it? No. So some types of blue coat software can be used for censorship and for surveillance, and there have been numerous citizen lab reports over the last years reporting on this type of software being used for these purposes. So blue coat was detected in Myanmar in a network 5 years ago, but in our current study, we did not detect the presence of blue coat anywhere in any of the networks that we tested. This is quite similarly, we found that circumvention tool sites like Tor were accessible, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger were also found to be accessible, and I guess this is a positive thing because it shows that that Myanmar is likely, more internet freedom friendly, so to speak, following the 2011 reforms. However, of course, there are various limitations to our studies because we didn't test every single website on the internet. We didn't perform tests in every single vantage point in the country. There are various limitations, as stated in our report, which is in the link at the bottom. But in comparison, we think that the state of internet censorship seems to be quite positive in the country.
Yeah. So I guess we have seen some of the results and some of the things that we can learn thanks to conducting these sorts of network measurements. But actually, all of the studies that you have heard about from Maria just before wouldn't have been possible if not thanks to all of the volunteers that install and run our software to gather this sort of evidence of internet censorship. And actually, you can do the same. You can also help us to increase transparency on internet censorship throughout the world. And we have a free and open source software that you can download and install either on Linux or Mac computers, but also now on mobile apps. So if you have an Android or an iOS device, you can download it from the Play Store, the App Store, and run some tests. So yeah, as I was saying, we have the main way through which people run Uniprobe is through the desktop app. And this desktop app features a web user interface that people can access in order to choose which tests they want to run automatically every day, as well as see immediately what are the results of ongoing or manually triggered experiments. And this is currently the platform that supports the most wide set of experiments. Another thing that we have been doing, particularly with our partners, with organizations in countries where we have been pushing out reports, is that what we will give them is a hardware device, a Raspberry Pi, with on it Uniprobe software. And all that they have to do is take this box, connect it to power, connect it to an internet connection, and that will, from then onwards, start running measurements on a daily basis and send back the results to us automatically. More recently, as I was saying, we also have a mobile app. So this is how the mobile app looks like. It also features a fairly advanced, I would say, speed test. But also it allows you to check which websites are being blocked on your network. And as you can see in this screenshot, actually, this was run in Italy, and we can see that it in fact finds evidence of censorship for the piratebay.org, which, as probably you know, is blocked in Italy. And this particular provider was blocking it by DNS-based censorship. And in these cases, actually, to circumvent the blocking, in many cases, all you have to do is change your DNS resolver. So if you use a DNS resolver that is not the Vodafone or Telecom Italia resolver, you can access the Pirate Bay in some cases. But running Uniprobe actually has some risks associated with it.
Yeah. And so Uni is hosted under the Tor project, and this sometimes creates some confusion because the Tor project, well, Tor software, as you might already know, is designed to provide you more privacy and anonymity on the internet. Uni, though, even though hosted under the Tor project, is very, very different in the sense that UniProbe is a tool for investigations. It is not designed to protect your privacy. And like any investigatory tool or like any investigation, some risks might potentially be involved. Specifically, well, obviously these risks vary from country to country, depending on the laws and the political frameworks of various countries. But some of the main things to be aware of prior to installing and running UniProbe include that, first of all, when you run the software, anyone who is monitoring your internet activity will be able to see that you're running UniProbe. It's not hidden in any way. And by anyone, I mean, for example, your government or your employer or your local ISP. They will be able to see that you are performing these tests. Second of all, one of the main tests that you run through UniProbe is designed to examine the reachability of various types of websites. Now, the types of websites that we examine, I'll get into a bit more detail in a moment, but in short, while they do include media websites, human rights websites, entertainment, and so on, they also include more provocative categories like pornography, gambling, and sometimes hate speech. The main reason why we include some of these more provocative categories also in the testing is because simply they are more likely to be blocked, and because they are more likely to be blocked, they can enable us to develop heuristics in detecting censorship also elsewhere. That said, in some countries around the world, connecting to and downloading data from sites like pornography might be illegal, or maybe even the mere action of running software which very quickly connects to all these sites, which is not a normal user behavior in a browser, might be enough to trigger suspicion. So it's important that before you run the software that you review the types of sites that you'll be testing when running UniProbe and that you feel comfortable with them. And if you don't, then you can make suggestions on what you would like to have added or removed. Another thing to keep in mind is that another one of Uni's core tests, Arturo will describe that in more detail in a moment, but essentially this test is designed to uncover systems in your network which could potentially be responsible for censorship or surveillance. And I'm using the word uncover because, it's basically trying to expose them in your network. And in doing so, with these mechanisms, the way that, based on what the test performs, this could potentially trigger the suspicion of your ISP or of someone who's monitoring your activity. And we have been told that this test could potentially be viewed as a form of hacking, but I'm putting hacking in quotes because, yeah, it's obviously not actual hacking, but, it may trigger some suspicion. But I guess the important thing to know is that regardless of the legality of UniProbe, because to my knowledge, I don't know, I'm personally not familiar with any country which explicitly prohibits users from performing network measurements or which explicitly prohibits software tools like UniProbe. It may be the case that in some countries, the use of UniProbe might potentially be prosecuted under broader national security laws, or maybe even the activity of using a tool which arguably could be viewed as somewhat political, could be viewed as a form of anti-government activity. Obviously, these types of risks vary depending on the country that you're running the software from, but we feel these are very important things to be aware of prior to engaging with this type of research. But another disclaimer is that, to our knowledge, none of our users have ever got into trouble, so we don't actually have any cases to point to where things have gone wrong. We really do hope that we will never be in a position to bring such cases up, but still there's something to be aware of. And also we have extensive documentation on our website where we analyze these potential risks that I just mentioned in detail, where you can read more and learn more. And obviously feel free to have discussions with us later on if you have further questions. So in terms of addressing risks, we feel that a lot of it comes down to the types of choices you can make. Obviously the risk is not the same for everyone. It also depends on your personal threat model. So for example, if you're a human rights activist already under surveillance and you're running UniProbe, that's very different to someone who's not under surveillance or not under targeted surveillance. So in terms of the choices you can make, depending on the types of tests that you run, there are different risks, right? It's not the same across all the different types of tests. Depending on which websites you're testing, there's also different risks. So for example, if you're not testing, say, pornography in a country where pornography is illegal, then there's less risk, And there's also like different choices you can make in terms of the types of information that you submit to our servers, and also in terms of how you upload the data. So again, for us, it's very important that you're aware of these various different types of choices so that you can use Uniprobe in a way that you're most comfortable with. So first of all, what type of data does Uni collect? We're talking about all this data that can be used as evidence and so on. Well, our software tests are designed in, while Uniprobe itself is not a tool for privacy protection, it's a tool for investigations, we ourselves are privacy advocates, and we actually do care about user privacy. So that said, when Uniprobe was designed, we were taking user privacy in regard to the extent possible. That is one of the reasons, for example, that we don't collect things like PCAPs, and where we try to limit the type of data we collect to the data that is necessary for our purpose, which is that of identifying and examining internet censorship. So within the types of data we collect, there are certain standard types of data. First of all, the country code. When we say country code, we mean the country from which you're running the software from. So in the case of Italy, we collect IT. The reason why we do this is kind of obvious, because when you run the software and you submit it to us for publication, we and others want to know where this measurement is coming from. So if censorship is detected, how can we attribute it to a specific country if we don't have the country code? The second type of information, which is obviously also very necessary, is the autonomous system number. This is like a unique identifier for various ISPs. So again, this is useful because that way we know where the measurements took place. So if we identify censorship, we know which ISP provider is implementing the censorship. The third thing is the dates and the time of measurements, so when the testing happened, which is very important so we're able to compare censorship across time. And then finally, obviously we collect different types of network measurements. The network measurement data that we collect varies, and it depends on the type of test that you're running. So depending on the test, different forms of network measurement data are collected. So these are the primary types of data that we collect. You can opt out from most of these. The only one that you can't opt out from is the date and the time of measurements. But for the rest, you do have the option to opt out. However, if you do opt out, that means that the data will not be sent to our servers, it will not be published, and therefore the data will be limited to you, and you won't be contributing to global transparency. And it'll also be up to you to process the data and derive meaning out of it. But surely this is an option that some of our partners choose, because in some countries, publishing this type of data, they fear that it might potentially be used to track back to them. So in their cases, it makes more sense for them not to have the network measurement data published. So depending on what you feel most comfortable with, you choose whether you want to opt in or opt out. An important disclaimer is that we actively try not to collect your IP addresses or any other potentially personally identifiable information. However, that said, it might be the case that some IP addresses or some potentially identifiable information might unintentionally be collected by us if it is, for example, included in the metadata of HTTP headers. We do our best to prevent this from happening. All data is sanitized before it's published, but there is the risk that worst case scenario this could potentially happen. So again, this is something that you should be aware of. You can read more about our data practices through our data policy, which is published on our website and linked on the site. So in terms of websites, when we talk about test lists, these are basically lists of websites that we test for censorship. The Citizen Lab has basically created a repository where they compile these different lists, and these are publicly available on GitHub. We and also other network measurement researchers rely on these repositories for our testing. The reason why we rely on these ones and why we don't test, for example, we don't just scrape sites from Alexa or whatever, is because with every testing that the user performs, we consume their bandwidth. So we want to ensure that the testing that we do has more quality, and that's why we curate the types of websites that we test. These websites fall under 31 broad categories, and they range from categories like human rights, news media, entertainment, culture, political criticism, but they also include these more provocative categories, as mentioned before, like pornography and so on. So in terms of potential risk involved, in terms of the types of websites that you test for, you actually can influence what is being tested by, contributing to these lists, by suggesting websites that you think should be added or removed, or any other suggestions that you may have. Every time you run the software, essentially you're testing two lists. The first list is what we call the global list, and this includes internationally relevant websites, which are usually in English. And then there's also the country-specific list. The country list is specific to your country. So in the case of Italy, the country list includes websites under these 31 categories that are more relevant to the Italian context. For some countries around the world, we may not have test lists. So if you're from a country where you see that that list doesn't exist, you can contribute by suggesting a list of websites to test. And here we basically link to the repository, and we also link to a guide which explains step by step how to contribute to existing lists and or how to create new lists.
And we don't have a test list for Italy, so if somebody would be interested in contributing to that, it would be very useful.
Yeah.
So yeah, to explain a bit about what actually the tests do in order to determine internet censorship. Well, I'll explain briefly a couple of the tests that we have that I think are the most interesting ones. So the first one is a test that we call web connectivity, and what this test tries to understand is whether or not a particular website is being blocked. And how it does this is that it tries to reproduce what you would be doing with a normal web browser when accessing a particular website. So what it does is it basically steps through all of the various stages that a web browser would go through when connecting to a particular site, and it does so from the vantage point of the probe, so from the network of the user running Uniprobe, as well as that of a control vantage point. So this is something that a network that we control, that we know to be good, uncensored. And then what we do is we, as I said, go through all these steps. We compare the control, the one from the uncensored network, with the experiment. And if there is a mismatch, then we say something is fishy, something wrong might be happening. There may be some internet censorship happening here. If everything looks normal, then we say, okay, everything is fine, it's good. And so yeah, the stages are basically that of a DNS lookup. What this does is it basically transforms a domain name, something like, I don't know, republica.it, into an IP address. So it serves to map some domain into some address that, something that is human meaningful into something that a computer can understand in order to send a packet over the network. Then once this is resolved, we try to do a connection just to the IP without sending any HTTP request, so without actually using the protocol that a browser uses in order to obtain web pages, in order to understand if the censor has just blocked the IP and not and is not actually inspecting the HTTP traffic in order to understand if they should block, for example, a specific page over the whole website. And then the full HTTP request, which actually says, give me this page. And as I said, the same thing is done on the control, and if any of these steps fails, they mismatch, we're able actually to pinpoint the exact reason for censorship. So we know if it failed on the DNS lookup, we know if it failed on the TCP connection, or if it failed on the HTTP request. And this is very important because it allows you, on the one side, to give better advice to people on what they can do in order to circumvent the blocking in place. But also it allows you to map how the censorship infrastructure is being implemented. So for example, if you see that today censorship is being implemented in a certain way, but tomorrow it's done differently, it makes you understand that probably they invested some resources in improving their censorship apparatus to be better at blocking. Another test is this test we call the invalid request line. And this is a test that aims to detect the presence of a middle box. So a middle box, as I was saying, is some device on your network that is responsible. What it does is it intercepts your traffic. So when you're communicating to some server, normally your traffic should just be relayed, should just be handed on to the next hop until it reaches the final destination. If a middle box is present on the network, actually your traffic is not just relayed, but it's intercepted, it's analyzed, and sometimes also transformed and altered. So what this test does is it's based on the assumption that if there is an unmediated connection to our control server, I should be able to send any data I want, and my control server that's configured in this way should just send it back as it received it. However, if a middle box is present on the network, it may try to understand what I'm trying to say. And since the protocol that the probe speaks is very close to the HTTP protocol, but just not quite exactly the HTTP protocol, oftentimes the middle box will get confused. It will try to understand this HTTP request, but since it's not exactly, it looks a bit like HTTP, but it's not exactly HTTP, it will sometimes fail to parse it, to interpret it, and get confused and not know what to do with it. So it will spit out error messages in some cases. And so through this test, we're able actually to detect many various types of proxy technologies, like Bluecoat, like Squid, like Privox. A bunch of different HTTP middle box technology is detected through this. And the interesting thing of this test is that oftentimes you're actually able to pinpoint down the exact specific version of the software. So you not only know that it's that software, but you know it's that software with that version number, which is also interesting and useful to keep track of sort of how the censorship apparatus is evolving over time. Another test is that also is aimed at detecting middle boxes that's somewhat similar is the header field manipulation. And this does something similar to the other one, except that it sends valid HTTP requests. It doesn't try to trick the middle box. But what it does is the control again sends back what it receives. But if it notices that some extra things get added, or in some way the request that is sent by the probe is altered, then it will know that somebody on the network changed it. And sometimes middle boxes are kind enough to leave their signature on HTTP requests. Like they will say X via Bluecoat or X via something, and so you will know in fact that they have forwarded on that packet. One thing to say, I guess, is that middle boxes are not necessarily bad. Like it's not that if you see a middle box on a network, it means that that ISP or that provider is up to no good. These are just signs. They're just bits of information that once you get other elements, you can understand better what is going on. So for example, if we see that censorship is happening on a particular network, and a middle box of a particular type is being used there, and it's likely that and that technology actually supports the possibility of implementing censorship, then it's quite likely that that specific software or hardware is being used for censorship. But the presence of a middle box is not an indication in and of itself of malpractice or of censorship. There are many legitimate reasons for having transparent proxies on networks, and it's not at all a thing that is bad per se.
So you skip the slide, but sure. As part of our work, open data, I guess you hear this a lot from a lot of different groups. We too advocate for open data, which is why we call the Open Observatory of Network Interference. So as mentioned, when you run the tests, like the ones that Arturo just described, the default is that all data is sent to our servers, processed, and boom, published. We publish data for numerous reasons, but first of all, because we don't expect you to trust us when we tell you that there's censorship. In fact, we don't expect you to trust anyone. We want everyone to be in the position where they can for themselves test their network and collect for themselves the data that they need that can show what is happening on the internet. And that is why we think it's important that all data is published. It helps increase transparency of information controls around the world. The more you run the software and if you do it across time, then you have a more accurate picture of internet censorship everywhere. But also by having the data public, this allows third parties and researchers to verify our findings, to verify the data, and to also potentially carry out research studies of their own based on other questions. So for example, several years ago, researchers from Berkeley University in Cambridge, they were able to examine other research questions around the discrimination of Tor users by websites through UNI data, which is not an obvious thing to do, but yet they were able to examine this. Are there any lawyers in the room? No? Journalists? Yeah, cool. So we have mostly a journalistic crowd. That's awesome. So actually, the main reason why UNI was created was for people like you. And the reason why we publish it is, again, for people like you, because we really hope that you will use this data to bring change in the world. And specifically what we mean is that instead of having to rely on people in countries saying, I can't access this website, I think this is down, blah, 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 we expect you to use the data that we publish, and to use that as part of your reporting. This will not only increase the credibility of your reporting, but it will also, prevent those in power from seeking plausible deniability. Because network measurement data provides a very clear picture in terms of what is and is not happening in a network. And this is quite hard to deny. And this can be very useful data for your stories and for your work. So we hope that you will use the data. We hope that lawyers will look at the data and examine the legality of censorship based on the reality of censorship as depicted through this network measurement data. And we hope that also that human rights advocates will also, tailor their campaign efforts based on where censorship is happening and how. And finally, is there anyone here who happens to be working on circumvention tool projects or something similar? No? Well, again, similarly, this type of data can support the work of circumvention tool projects because they can have a better understanding of where they should be, prioritizing their outreach efforts based on the countries where censorship appears to be implemented the most. So all this talk about open data, but where is the data? So one place you can find the data is here. So this is UNI Explorer. This is a global data map. It's interactive, it's live, and by interactive and live, what we mean is that every time a user runs UniProbe, this gets automatically updated with the latest data. There is no manual configuration, it's all automatic. This is arguably the largest publicly available resource on internet censorship to date. And the reason why I'm saying that is not because I work with UNI, but because thousands, well now tens of thousands of individuals around the world have been contributing to the data over the last 5 years. This basically consists of network measurement data showing the reality of censorship over the last 5 years across more than 190 countries. So we feel that in a way this is a gold mine that we hope that you will dig through and find the data that is more meaningful to your story or to your type of work. As you can see, it's color-coded. The countries which are red are basically the countries where we have confirmed various cases of censorship. When we say confirmed, what we mean is that we detected block pages. That said, the map, unfortunately, is a bit misleading because it kind of implies that there's more censorship in the eastern part of the world in comparison to the west. But I would just like to specify that that is not actually the case, or we don't think it's the case. It's just the case that it was easier for us to detect censorship in the eastern part of the world. It doesn't mean that censorship is not happening in the west, it just means it's more covert. Because we've heard of many cases of, say, throttling, which is a covert form of censorship where connections are slowed down. Those we often observe are more prominent in the western part of the world, but those are harder cases to actually confirm.
Yeah, and for developers or people that need to have a more programmatic or automated access to the data, we also provide an API that you can use to query and parse and load the data into your own analysis tools. So if you require doing some sort of analysis that we do not already provide through our Explorer web interface, you can access this this API. The public API is still under active development. So what is exposed currently is still in, I would say, alpha stage. But if you have some specific features or requests that you would like to see implemented as part of our measurement API, we would be very happy to do that. Yeah, as Maria said, we only consider a case to be confirmed when we find a block page, and so this requires actually manual labor of like somebody verifying that what our tools that are aimed at detecting block pages is in fact a block page and is not a false positive. There are many things that an automated tool may think looks like a block page but is not actually a block page. For example, like CAPTCHAs that appear on pages, like the Cloudflare CAPTCHA that tells you, are you a robot? Please enter these images or what describe them. And so for that reason, we don't yet cover all of the possible cases in which there are block pages. We have as we mentioned briefly before, we have a partnership program. So if you are interested in investigating cases of internet censorship in a particular country, you should reach out to us, and we can tell you more about how we can work together on producing these reports on that country and support you in the work you do related to digital rights in your country. We also have monthly community meetings that you can join either over IRC or also through our Slack bridge. You can contribute by running Unipro, by suggesting things to be added to the test list, analyzing the data, and telling stories through it. Here are some of the links of the things we talked about today. You should feel free to contact us via email, IRC, or Twitter. And I think we may have some time for some questions. Yep. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Are there any questions? Everything was crystal clear. Awesome. Great. We look forward to working with you.
Wait, there's... Yeah.
Hi. Thank you very much for your time. I just wonder if you experienced any kind of problem with authorities, or they contact, I don't know, someone who contact you, and I don't know, yeah, any
personally or because of our work with Uni? No, I'm joking.
Any kind of problem?
No, so far, no. So far, I think we have not had any issues whatsoever with authorities, either local or foreign.
We haven't had... Oh, sorry. Sorry, I just remembered something. So I was going to say that we haven't had problems with authorities, and neither have any of our users so far. So that's very positive, I think. One of the interesting things, though, is that we've received more attention by telcos, by ISP providers, than governments per se. So actually, quite recently, we published a report on our study of internet censorship in Thailand, and then one of the ISPs that we found to be blocking a media website got in touch with us, and they were like, "Oh wow, like really, like." Elaborate on this. They got in touch with them.
I'm not sure if we can talk about this publicly, though. I think it's probably... Anyway, we can talk about this after.
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is that we've received more responses from telcos and various ISP providers, and I think that's quite a positive thing, because in some cases they're willing to lift the blocks.
Yeah, and I mean, we are obviously in a privileged position, being, you know, from... fairly democratic countries living in Europe. I think if we were developers or trying to run the same project based out of China, we probably would have had much more challenges and much more difficulties, that for sure.
Are there any data related to China? Because I wanted to ask this before. I wanted to ask this before about China situation because I think you can hear me. Yeah, I wanted to know if there are some data you recollect about China, something I can find on your project, because I'm interested in that area, and actually that area is very infamous, known for having a big censorship.
Yeah, we do have a lot of data also on internet censorship in China. I think I'm not sure, we'd have to look at the Explorer, but we definitely have measurements from China from the past 6 months. I don't know if there's more fresh data in a way, but yeah, for sure you can find measurements from China in our data set, and I would be happy to talk to you later of how we can sort of make it be at most useful for the type of research you're doing. No more questions? Okay, well, thank you again very much for your time.
Thanks so much.
Various cases of network interference or internet censorship around the world. The foundation of our methodology is that we want to ensure that the tests that are implemented as part of our software testing suite are openly specified, as in they are well documented and people can independently write their own implementation of such tests. The reference implementation, I guess, is also free and open source, so you can verify if what we claim to be measuring is in fact being measured. And all the data that we collect is made available openly. The sorts of tests that we conduct as part of UNI are mainly fit mainly within, I guess, these 5 categories. So we have tests that aim to detect the blocking of particular websites. So here we're trying to answer the question of this set of sites that are interesting, relevant to be monitored, which ones are in fact being blocked and how are they being blocked. We have tests for detecting the blocking of various instant messaging apps, including WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, and Telegram. We have tests that aim to check if whether or not particular censorship circumvention tools are working or are not working, such as Tor, Siphon, VPN, Lantern, all the various pluggable transports, etc. And then we have a series of tests that
of digital rights organizations across South America, Africa, Asia, Southeast Asia more specifically. And we've seen a lot of very interesting cases. First of all, in Brazil, some of you may have already heard of these cases, but a judge essentially ordered the blocking of WhatsApp. Are we familiar with this case? No? Okay. Well, how it happened basically was that, well, I would imagine that most of us are probably familiar with the fact that WhatsApp now uses the Signal protocol for end-to-end encryption, right? Great. Okay, so while this is a fantastic thing because, you know, it enables millions of users to have more privacy in their communications, it also created certain problems for certain governments around the world. More specifically, when Brazilian authorities were investigating various criminal cases, they asked WhatsApp to disclose data pertaining to the individuals who they thought were suspects involved in drug trafficking cases. WhatsApp denied to disclose this type of information. And as a result, as a form of retribution, Brazilian authorities ordered the blocking of WhatsApp twice. The first time was in December 2015. That lasted for about 48 hours. And the second time was in May 2016, which actually lasted quite longer. That was for about 72 hours. The interesting thing here is that obviously since the Signal protocol has been implemented, even if WhatsApp did want to disclose this type of data, so basically the personal communications of the suspects, they obviously are not in a position to do so because there's end-to-end encryption being implemented. And this is, we think, a very interesting case where authorities try to take action against companies, and specifically in this case, they ordered the blocking of the app completely. But in many cases, what we also see is that a lot of governments have or seek plausible deniability when they implement various types of information controls. The thing with censorship is that a lot of the reporting is based on rumors. So, for example, people saying, "I can't access this website. Oh, this is very slow," or there's various types of rumors that people on the ground report. Sometimes these cases may be censorship, sometimes not. When we talk about censorship, what we mean is the intentional blocking of information. So the question is, how can you collect data that can actually prove that it was intentional blocking? So this is an example of what we did in Brazil, where we developed a test specifically designed to test the reachability of WhatsApp. And our partners on the ground ran the test and collected data, which not only showed that WhatsApp was indeed blocked, but it also showed how WhatsApp was blocked, in this case specifically through DNS hijacking. We subsequently released a blog, which also includes all of the data, which shows exactly how the app was blocked. Very often we see that censorship is politically motivated, or we think that is the case, or but it's even more interesting when we're able to collect data which can prove that censorship is in fact politically motivated. We have examined numerous cases like these ones over the last year. One example was in Uganda. So in Uganda they had general elections in February 2016, and during the general elections, there were rumors on the ground or reports that various social media sites were inaccessible. Then a few months later, in May of the same year, during the inauguration of President Museveni, similarly, there were again
aim to detect what we call middle boxes, and we'll go a bit later into what we mean exactly by this. But in general, these are devices that can be present on a network, and what they do is they basically intercept your network traffic and sometimes perform alterations to such network traffic. And they can be responsible sometimes also for internet censorship or even surveillance. Other types of tests that we have are more aimed at sort of measuring the speed and performance of your network. So for example, we have as part of the mobile app an implementation of the NDT test, or network diagnostic test, which basically tells you how fast your network is. And so now Maria will tell you a bit about some of the recent cases of internet censorship that we have investigated with UNI.
Thanks. So over the last year, we have tried to bring UNI to a more diverse audience, in the sense that up until quite recently, most of UNI's, can you hear me well? Most of UNI's audience was mostly technologists, but in the end of the day, we feel that the project is designed for lawyers, human rights defenders, journalists, basically people who are interested in using the type of data that UNI can collect to examine internet censorship. And because, as mentioned by Arturo, the software basically is designed to perform tests on networks and to collect network measurement data, this data can potentially serve as evidence of internet censorship. So specifically, so over the last year, we've been working with a number.
Okay, good. Oh, it's very loud. I guess we can start, since we're already a couple minutes in. Thank you for coming and attending our session. Hope we are not. You're not too tired after having had lunch, or that you are starving waiting to go for lunch. But today what we are going to talk to you about is about how you can uncover instances of internet censorship through free and open source software. We will also talk to you a bit about some of the recent cases of internet censorship that we have found around the world in some specific case studies that we have been working on in the past 1 or 2 years. So first, to tell you a bit about our project, what we work on, we are UNI, or the Open Observatory of Network Interference. And what this is a free software project under the Tor project that aims to build a decentralized platform for monitoring internet censorship around the world. This project started back in 2012, and since then we have been collecting millions of measurements from all over the world. We cover now more than even 190 countries, actually. And thanks to these free and open source tests, we have gathered data that proves, that shows evidence of